Chapter 1 of The Corner House Girls. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leanne Fortune. The Corner House Girls by Grace Brooks Hill. Chapter 1. Left High and Dry. Look out, Dot. You'll fall off that chair as sure as you live, child. Tess was bustling and important. It was baking day in the Kenway household. She had the raisins to stone, and the smallest Kenway was climbing up to put the package of raisins back upon the cupboard shelf. There was going to be a cake for the morrow. Ruth was a flour to her elbows, and Aggie was stirring the eggs till the beater was just a whiz. Crash! Bang! Over went the chair, down came Dot, and the raisins scattered far and wide over the freshly scrubbed linoleum. Fortunately, the little busybody was not hurt. "What did I tell you?" demanded the raisin seeder, after Ruth had made sure there were no broken bones, and only a skinned place on Dot's wrist. "What did I tell you? You are such a careless child." Dot's face began to cloud up, but it did not rain, for Aggie said kindly, "Don't mind what she says, Dot. Leave those raisins to me. You run, get your hat on. Tess has finished seeding that cupful. Now it's time you two young ones went on that errand. Isn't that so, Ruth?" The elder sister agreed as she busily mixed the butter and flour. Butter was high. She put in what she thought they could afford, and then she shut her eyes tight and popped in another lump. On a bright and sunny day like this one, the tiny flat at the top of the Essex Street tenement was a cheerful place. Ruth was a very capable housekeeper. She had been such for 2 years previous to their mother's death, for Mrs. Kenway had been obliged to go out to work. Now, at 16, Ruth felt herself to be very much grown up. It is often responsibility and not years that ages one. If Ruth had an old head on green shoulders, there was reason for it, for almost all the income the Kenways had was their father's pension. The tide of misfortune which had threatened the family when the father was killed in the Philippines had risen to its flood at Mrs. Kenway's death 2 years before this day, and had now left the Kenway girls high and dry upon the strand of an ugly tenement in an ugly street of the very ugliest district of Bloomingburg. The girls were 4, and there was Aunt Sarah Stower. There were no boys. There never had been any boys in the Kenway family. Ruth said she was glad. Aggie said she was sorry, and as usual Tess sided with the elder sister, while Dot agreed with the 12-year-old Aggie that a boy to do the chores would be sort of nice. "Suppose he was like that bad Tommy Rooney who jumps out of the dark corners on the stairs to scare you, Dot Kenway?" demanded the 10-year-old Tess seriously. "Why, he couldn't be like Tommy, not if he was our brother," said the smallest girl with conviction. "Well, he might," urged Tess, who professed a degree of experience and knowledge of the world far beyond that of her 8-year-old sister. "You see, you can't always sometimes tell about boys." Tess possessed a strong sense of duty, too. She would not allow Dot, on this occasion, to leave the raisins scattered over the floor. Down the 2 smaller girls got upon their hands and knees and picked up the very last of the dried fruit before they went for their hats. "Whistle, Dot, you must whistle," commanded Tess. "You know that's the only way not to yield to temptation when you're picking up raisins." I can't whistle, Tess," claimed Dot. "Well, pucker up anyway," said Tess. "You can't do that with raisins in your mouth." And she proceeded to falteringly whistle several bars of Yankee Doodle herself, to prove to the older girls that the scattered raisins she found were going into their proper receptacle. The Kenway girls had to follow many economies, and had learned early to be self-denying. Ruth was so busy and so anxious, she declared herself, she did not have time to be pretty like other girls of her age. She had stringy black hair that never would look soft and wavy, as its owner so much desired. She possessed big brown eyes, really wonderful eyes, if she had only known it. People sometimes said she was intellectual-looking. That was because of her high, broad brow. She owned little colour, and she had contracted a nervous habit of pressing her lips tight together when she was thinking. But she possessed a laugh that fairly jumped out at you from her eyes and mouth. It was so unexpected. Ruth Kenway might not attract much attention at first glance, but if you looked at her a second time, you were bound to see something in her countenance that held you and interested you. "Do smile oftener, Ruth," begged jolly, roly-poly Agnes. "You always look just as though you were figuring how many pounds of round steak go into $1." "I guess I am thinking of that most of the time," sighed the oldest Kenway girl. Agnes was as plump as a partridge. When she tried to keep her face straight, the dimples just would peep out. She laughed easily and cried stormily. She said herself that she had bushels of molasses-coloured hair, and her blue eyes could stare a rude boy out of countenance, only she had to spoil the effect the next moment by giggling. Another thing, Agnes usually averaged 2 soul chums among her girlfriends at school per week. Tess, nobody ever remembered she had been christened Teresa, had some of Ruth's dignity and some of Aggie's good looks. She was the quick girl at her books. She always got along nicely with grown-ups. They said she had tact, and she had the kindest heart of any girl in the world. Dot, or Dorothy, was the baby, and was a miniature of Ruth as far as seriousness of demeanour and hair and eyes went. She was a little brunette fairy, with the most delicately moulded limbs, a faint blush in her dark cheeks, and her steady gravity delighted older people. They said she was such an old-fashioned little thing. It was Saturday. From the street below, shrill voices rose in a nightmare of sound that broke in a nerve-racking wave upon the ears. Numerous wild red Indians could make no more savage sounds if they were burning a captive at the stake. It was the children on the block, who had no other playground. Dot shuddered to venture forth into the turmoil of the street, and Tess had to acknowledge a faster beating of her own heart. Dot had her Alice doll, her choicest possession. They were going to the greengrocer's at the corner and to the drugstore. At the greengrocer's they were to purchase a cabbage, 2 quarts of potatoes, and 2 pennies worth of soup greens. At the drugstore they would buy the usual nickel's worth of peppermint drops for Aunt Sarah. Every Saturday since Dot could remember, and since Tess could remember, and since Agnes could remember, even every Saturday since Ruth could remember, there had been 5 cents worth of peppermint drops bought for Aunt Sarah. The larder might be very nearly bare, shoes might be out at toe and stockings out at heel, there might be a dearth of food on the table, but Aunt Sarah must not be disappointed in her weekly treat. "It is the only pleasure the poor creature has," their mother was wont to say. "Why deprive her of it? There is not much that seems to please Aunt Sarah, and this is a small thing, children." Even Dot was old enough to remember the dear little mother saying this. It was truly a sort of sacred bequest, although their mother had not made it a mandatory charge upon the girls. "But mother never forgot the peppermints herself. Why should we forget them?" Ruth asked. Aunt Sarah Stowe was a care, too, left to the Kenway girls' charge. Aunt Sarah was an oddity. She seldom spoke, although her powers of speech were not in the least impaired. Moreover, She seldom moved from her chair during the day, when she sewed or crocheted, yet she had the active use of her limbs. Housework, Aunt Sarah abhorred. She had never been obliged to do it as a girl and young woman, so she had never lifted her hand to aid in domestic tasks since coming to live with the Kenways, and Ruth could barely remember her coming. Aunt Sarah was only aunt to the Kenway girls by usage. She was merely their mother's uncle's half-sister, and that's a relationship, as Aggie said, that would puzzle a Philadelphia lawyer to figure out. As Tess and Dot came down the littered stoop of the tall brick house they lived in, a rosy, red-haired boy with a snub nose and twinkling blue eyes suddenly popped up before them. He was dressed in fringed leggings and jacket, and wore a band of feathers about his cap. Me heap big Injun!" he exclaimed, brandishing a wooden tomahawk before the faces of the startled girls. "Scalp white squaw, kill papoose!" And he clutched at the Alice doll. Dot screamed, as well she might. The thought of seeing her most beloved child in the hands of this horrid apparition. "Now you just stop bothering us, Tommy Rooney," commanded Tess, standing quickly in front of her sister. "You go away, or I'll tell your mother." "Oh, tell-tale tit, your tongue shall be split," scoffed the dancing Indian. "Give me the papoose. Make heap big Injun of it." Dot was actually crying. Tess raised her hand threateningly. "I don't want to hurt you, Tommy Rooney," she said decisively, "but I shall slap you if you don't let us alone." "Oh, would you? Would you? Got to catch first," shouted Tommy, making dreadful grimaces. His cheeks were painted in black and red stripes, and these decorations added to Dot's fright. "You can't scare me," he boasted. But he kept his distance, and Tess hurried Dot along the street. There were some girls they knew, for they went to the public school with them, but Tess and Dot merely spoke to them and passed right on. "We'll go to the drug store first," said the older girl. "Then we won't be bothered with the vegetable bags while we're getting Aunt Sarah's peppermints." "Say, Tess," said Dot, gulping down a dry sob. "Yes?" "Don't you wish we could get something 'sides those old peppermint drops?" "But Ruthie hasn't any pennies to spare this week. She told us so." "Never does have pennies to spare," declared Dot with finality. "But I mean I wish Aunt Sarah wanted some other kind of candy besides peppermints." "Why, Dot Kenway, she always has peppermints. She always takes some in her pocket to church on Sunday, and eats them while the minister preaches. You know she does." "Yes, I know it," admitted Dot. "And I know she always gives us each one before we go to Sunday school. That's why I wish we could buy her some other kind of candy. I'm tired of peppermints. I think they are a most unsatisfactory candy, Tess." "Well, I am amazed at you, Dot Kenway," declared Tess with her most grown-up air. "You know we couldn't any more change and buy wintergreen or clove or lemon drops than we could fly. Aunt Sarah's got to have just what she wants." "Has she?" queried the smaller girl doubtfully. "I wonder why." "Because she has," retorted Tess with unshaken belief. The drops were purchased, the vegetables were purchased, the sisters were homeward bound. Walking toward their tenement, they overtook and passed a tall, grey-haired gentleman in a drab morning coat and hat. He was not a doctor, and he was not dressed like a minister. Therefore, he was a curious-looking figure in this part of Bloomsburg, especially at this hour. Tess looked up slyly at him as she and Dot passed. He was a cleanly shaven man with thin, tightly shut lips, and many fine lines about the corners of his mouth and about his eyes. He had a high hooked nose, too, so high and such a barrier to the rest of his face that his sharp grey eyes seemed to be looking at the world in general over a high board fence. Dot was carrying the peppermint drops, and carrying them carefully, while Tess's hands were occupied with the other purchases. So Master Tommy Rooney thought he saw his chance. "Candy, candy!" he yelled, darting out at them from an areaway. "Heap big Injun want candy, or take white squaws papoose. Ugh!" Dot screamed. Tess tried to defend her and the white bag of peppermints, but she was handicapped with her own bundles. Tommy was as quick and as slippery as an eel. Suddenly the gentleman in the silk hat strode forward, thrust his gold-headed walking-stick between Tommy's lively legs, and tripped that master of mischief into the gutter. Tommy scrambled up, gave one glance at the tall gentleman, and fled, affrighted. The gentleman looked down at Tess and Dot. "Oh, thank you, sir," said the bigger girl. "We're much obliged." "Yes, a knight to the rescue, eh? Do you live on this block, little lady?" he asked, and when he smiled his face was a whole lot pleasanter than it was in repose. "Yes, sir, right there at number 80. "Number 80?" repeated the gentleman with some interest. "Is there a family in your house named Kenway?" "Oh, yes, sir, we're the Kenways, 2 of them," declared Tess, while Dot was a little inclined to put her finger in her mouth and watch him shyly. "Ha!" exclaimed the stranger. 2 of Leonard Kenway's daughters? Is your mother at home?" We haven't any mother, not now, sir," said Tess, more faintly. "Not living? I had not heard. Then who is the head of the household?" "Oh, you want to see Ruth," cried Tess. "She's the biggest. It must be Ruth you want to see." "Perhaps you are right," said the gentleman, eyeing the girls curiously. "If she is the chief of the clan, it is she I must see. I have come to inform her of her Uncle Peter Stower's death." End of chapter 1, recording by Leanne Fortune.